everyone, I'm Haley.
I'm Beth.
I'm Wen.
And I'm Kim.
And we are the South Asia group from Julian Thompson's International Field Study Experience Project. Today we're going to be doing a roundtable discussion where we'll be talking about social media in South Asia and how it pertains to the topics of democratization, public discourse and speech, public and mental health.
Each of us research a country in South Asia, deeply analyzing the relationship social media has to public health and democracy. By researching 4 countries, Vietnam, Singapore, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, we were seeking a better understanding of the region as a whole.
And by drawing upon our individual research, we were able to write a collective synopsis of our findings, comparing and contrasting how social media is wielded both by the government and their citizens in terms of public health and political discourse.
By diversifying our research efforts, we hope to provide an overview of social media and its impacts across the South Asia region. So over the next 20 minutes, we plan to discuss an array of topics relating to this project so that we can have a comprehensive and digestible overview of our findings.
So I'll go ahead and kick us off with the first question we have planned. How has social media positively impact overall public health in your country, or conversely, how has it negatively impacted public health?
So I'll start. In Sri Lanka, social media has been a positive force in public health. Dengue, an insect-borne disease, which has really plagued the country. It's a tropical island country since the 1960s, needed some help. And the Sri Lankans have used mobile phones more than any other device. As a matter of fact, statistics show that there's now about 141 cell phones for each 100 residents. So given this unprecedented proliferation of cell phones, Sri Lanka was ripe for some kind of mobile phone-based system to fight diseases. And so they've come up with a couple apps. One of them is called MOBAs, and they can identify breeding grounds, engage communities in prevention behavior much faster than before. And so thereby hopefully reducing and maybe eliminating dengue.
It's really interesting. Very similarly in Bangladesh, there's a widespread usage of the internet, social media, and mobile phones for several reasons, and that's really picked up in the last decade. One statistic showed that more people know what social media platforms like Facebook are more than they know what the internet is. And so it's been a great tool for governments and health organizations to utilize, similarly to kind of spread awareness about infectious diseases, provide resources, and then in the COVID-19 pandemic, really provide a lot of information regarding masking, vaccination, and social distancing. But unfortunately, social media has also been used to spread a lot of misinformation about different public health items, such as vaccinations when it comes to infectious diseases. This isn't something that's singular to Bangladesh by any means, but it definitely took a huge toll on the amount of people who took things like COVID seriously in the country, or understood kind of the seriousness of masking or things like washing your hands and practicing hygienic practices when it comes to kind of combating different health issues.
Yeah, Haley, I found the same trend that also happened in Vietnam. And Beth, yeah, in Vietnam, cell phone are very popular and Facebook is the leading app. But the positive aspect is in Vietnam, social media significantly increased Vietnam awareness of public health issues, especially during the COVID-19. People optimized the platform to obtain COVID-19 related information, preventive practices, as well as vaccine information. And at the same time, the Vietnamese government also utilized the platform to disseminate scientific information and heighten public attention to important public health messages. Conversely, because Vietnamese people on average spend the top 2.5 hours on Facebook. So to me is that is overconsumption and has the negative impact on the population, especially young people, because that lead to, sleep deprivation, loneliness, lack of social interactions, and also widespread misinformation and false information with reference to prevention, vaccine, and treatment measure. At that time, it was uncontrollable. And again, with those misinformation, it led to the anxiety, fear, and drove the irrational behaviors among the Vietnamese community.
That's really interesting. When I actually found the same trends in Singapore that you guys have previously mentioned. In Singapore, Facebook is also one of the most popular platforms, and the government recognized this, and that's the tool that they latched onto during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. They used it in the way that was previously described, of course, to combat misinformation and spread awareness about the different symptoms as well as how to get vaccinated. But also, they really used it in terms of public health to help combat mass panic around the pandemic. The government was concerned, citizens would go to grocery stores and stockpile toilet paper because in those early days, things were so unknown. So the government sent officials like to supermarkets and they filmed them using Facebook to show the public that everything was okay. So I really think it's interesting how these platforms are being used in this region to reach out to the public and spread these messages.
Okay, so let's talk politics. In the country you research, how has the government reacted to political discourse on social media? And what steps has it taken to either promote or suppress political activism on social media? Who wants to start?
I can kick us off. In Bangladesh, so social media has definitely been wielded as a weapon almost by the government to suppress political activism and political opposition of the current regime, the Awami government, who's been in power for quite some time. The most recent piece of legislation is the Digital Security Act that was passed in 2018. And this is just another reiteration of the 2006 Information and Communication Technology Act. And basically, this is just really vague legislation that allows the government to suppress free speech or political activism or any sort of political opposition from other parties online in the name of national security interests. Time and time again, the government has used this as a way to prosecute and persecute individuals, whether that be someone who's just a blogger or someone from another political party. And they do face serious judicial implications as a result. The Digital Security Act also allows the government to request any and all user information from social media platforms in operation in the country. So that's another really big fear of different organizations like Human Rights Watch amongst them. And they're calling it democratic backsliding for the country. And it's really contributing to kind of this shift towards authoritarianism, with social media kind of being the catalyst and the legislation around it to do so.
Okay, so in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka really struggles with poor governance. I mean, politics is a family business. That's what I learned. Politics is a family business, and two families have ruled the country for the last 25 years. In the last election, Gotabaya Rajapaksa won, and he appointed his brother prime minister and his other brother finance minister. So, like like Haley was talking about, he uses, or the government uses this, an act called the Prevention of Terrorism Act that is really old. It's 1979. It predates social media. And basically, they use it to just restrict freedom of speech that it deems a threat to national security. And that freedom of speech, it's really dissent that they're preventing. And I'll just give you one short example. I saw this 3 times where the country totally shut down social media. But one time was, I'm sure a lot of you remember this, but on Easter Sunday in 2029, there were a series of 6 bombings, terrorist bombings in Sri Lanka. More than 250 people were killed in a country not known for terror. And as the day progressed, that Easter Sunday, more and more bombs were going off in different cities, and citizens are trying to like check in on WhatsApp with their family members and like get security like updates, and they couldn't because most of the social media platforms were blocked, raising concerns about communication and sharing information in a crisis. So with the shutdown of all these platforms, people relied on word of mouth. And even, the government claimed that the shutdown was necessary to curtail the spread of false information and violence. But really, these media shutdowns cause fear and a sense of panic. Just to close on that is that they have brought a new anti-terrorism bill to Parliament only on April 25th, 2023. So as I was doing my research, it's being hotly debated. It's supposed to moderate the government's powers during protests, but human rights groups are skeptical. Anybody else?
Yeah, because I have like a touch on the mention from Haley and from Beth, like, persecuting bloggers, shut down the internet. That is very popular here in Vietnam because you guys know that freedom of speech here in Vietnam is strictly restricted because the whole country is run by Communist Party. Their central role, they are the central role that they control politics and society. And then the Vietnamese social media, therefore, is a state-owned system, and news content aims to serve the interests of the country. And, the social media platform are not supposed not to be a place for people to address or to criticize any government activities, such as corruption, climate change, or things like that. So, yeah, I found, the same trend with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. My country, Vietnam, may, open the access to let people interact with the outside world, but however, it is not a place for people to discuss the political issues. Kim, do you have any opinion about political discourse?
Yeah, so it's really unique because Singapore in name is a democracy. It adopted like a Western democratic governance model from when it was colonized by the British. So they still have that today. They have a prime minister, they have a parliament. But in my research, I found a lot of contrasts in that. There were a few articles I found that dubbed Singapore as like a perfect little police state. Because while it is a democracy, the government itself practices authoritarianism. There was one line specifically in an article I found that said, "Oh, Singapore, the economy is free, the money is free, but the people are not." And social media is a way that the government uses, like how it tries to control the citizens, although it's unique because the citizens don't really feel as if they are being controlled, or they don't recognize that maybe their limits or maybe their freedoms are being infringed upon. I found a Pew survey during my research that said, more than 3/4 of Singaporeans believe social media is good for democracy. And so they believe how social media is impacting them in their politics, like they're fine with it. And I'm not saying that's necessarily good or bad either way. I just thought it was interesting how they can be kind of accustomed to that way of life, and how the government claims that they're using social media to protect them instead of as a way for them to receive all kinds of information.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
like, oh, go ahead.
no, no,
Oh, you're
please.
done. Yeah, I found the same thing too. It's very interesting. To how, Singapore government, protect their citizen because they have democracy and human right. They promote the human right things, I guess. As opposed to, in Vietnam, the government promote police intimidation, harassment, or imprisonment. That's something we need to think about.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting how, I guess, politics and government and culture come together to impact like how society thinks and feels about how their systems should be.
Right.
Um, and with that being said, I know those trends. We also explored those trends when we looked at social media and mental health.
Mhm.
So, in the respective countries that we researched, what is the relationship between social media and mental health? Um, and what have you found that the government in your country has done to deal with any issues that stem from social media and mental health, like including cyberbullying or suicidal ideation? Does anyone want to start?
I can kick us off. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in Bangladesh with regards to mental health and social media. In some ways, it's been really positive. It's kind of helping to destigmatize mental health, which is a rather taboo topic in the country still. It's providing a sense of community for people to connect over things like anxiety or depression. But at the same time, what little research does exist is showing that it's also imposing a lot of anxiety, low self-esteem issues due to, comparing yourself to others online, not being able to meet these unrealistic expectations that are put forth on social media. And there's also a trend of suicide and suicide ideation via Facebook. There's quite a few news articles kind of detailing how it's become a trend in the last 2 years for individuals to either film the act of suicide or make a post
Mm.
prior to committing that act. And unfortunately, not a lot has been done to combat this issue either. So that's a really, sad aspect of it. But at the same time, there's also ample opportunity for individuals to find help or to find resources online also. And last year, the government actually did a social media campaign on YouTube and Facebook, kind of destigmatizing, like I mentioned before, different mental health ailments, kind of providing the public with different government resources that they can utilize if they're in need of support or a loved one is in need of support. So, social media definitely has the ability to offer a lot of good in the realm of mental health, but definitely there needs to be more research into the area of the direct impacts that it's having on the Bangladesh population, mentally, their well-being.
Yeah, I personally, I look at the relationship between social media practices and mental health in Vietnam from two different perspectives. The first one, I believe that, those platforms, you know, can uplift people's mood, like help them to relax, or help them feel entertained. But by reading the news, celebrity news, those kind of things like that. But on the flip side, it is the same social media platforms that make people feel agitated or increase the anxiety, um or depression, or lately is being addicted among the young population. And at the end of the day, they feels like they become such a lazy person and they don't want to do anything and distance themselves from, you know, the whole community. In Vietnam, based on my research, I know that starting from June 2021, the Ministry of Information and Communication introduced a code of conduct on social networks to create a safe and healthy online environment. And the objective looks to educate awareness and create positive habits and behaviors of social media users. I just don't have any early, you know, comment on this because it is so news. But I do believe they will make some progress, you know, to make it a healthy environment for everyone. And so far, I haven't seen any suicide, you know, anything huge like that happened in Vietnam.
Well, Wen, I hope that does work because it sounds promising. Well, in Sri Lanka it's a really conservative country with rigid gender roles, like a lot of other countries in South Asia. A research article I read studied young women who use Facebook as a way to share personal views and information they would otherwise not feel comfortable sharing. So it gave them an opportunity to express themselves freely and like break the silence, if you will. However, the downside was that in the country there was weak or just non-existent privacy laws. And this allowed like users to misuse their personal information or their photographs. And that had serious implications for these women, resulting in numerous women becoming depressed and committing suicide while the perpetrators went free. Studies have shown that like engagement in social media in a socially conservative culture can have some negative mental health implications if fallout occurs. So like such as interactions, especially if they were intimate in nature, become public. It's really humiliating for them. And so suicide and other mental health issues are a global concern. But in Sri Lanka, and I noticed it in other Asian countries, they're handicapped by a lack of research. That a lot of the research that's been done has been done in Western countries. And so that's one of the things that needs to be done. While findings can always be extrapolated, it's really critical to do research or set this research in these culturally relevant contexts. And just as a side note, sort of like Wen was saying, in March of 2022, they did also approve a Personal Data Protection Act, was modeled after the act in Singapore and the Europe's GDPR. And it does give women more control of personal data and created a monitoring board where they can report abuses.
I definitely have to agree with you, Beth, about the research, because the research I found in Singapore about mental health and social media really targeted the youth specifically, as opposed to the general population. But in that research, I found in the youth, I found the same trends. Youth who used TikTok and Instagram every day were more at risk of body image anxiety. And there were many instances of suicidal ideation, especially because the youth in Singapore are influenced by celebrities and young influencers, especially in Asia. So there was one instance where a popular singer from Korea died a few years ago. And of course, people were mourning him, but the youth especially idealized him after it was publicized that he took his life. And there was a message of that the teens felt that he was more loved in death than in life. So social media cultivated this hype around suicide. Thankfully, it seems like the government is recognizing how social media is affecting youth, not specifically in suicide ideation, but they do know that cyberbullying is contributing to these mental health negative implications. So they're starting a task force within the government to work with social media companies to try to control the contents or take content down that maybe it could contribute to self-harm or can contribute to bullying of certain populations. it's a relatively new task force, so only time will tell how it works, but it seems like a step in the right direction to protect the youth in terms of that aspect.
So yeah, we all acknowledge the good side and the bad side of social media, but I believe, you know, like in Singapore, the government can still use the platform to fix the issue and to protect the citizen. So, okay, so how has social media been used for the collective good in the country that we analyzed?
Well, I'll start. I'll just say that basically a youth-led social media movement brought down the president. And what happened is there were these, it was a terrible inflationary situation. They couldn't buy goods, medicine, food they needed. And so the youth decided after an April shutdown of the internet, once more we shut down the internet, they regrouped and started this powerful digital strategy that used that we're able to reach hundreds of thousands of people. They have 8 million Facebook users. And so the activists found that this online research was extremely effective and cheap. There was no cost to it. And so they were able to get hundreds of thousands of people out into the street. Eventually, the president fled the country and resigned. And no other president in the country's history has done that. So that's just one way where it was used for collective good.
That's fascinating. That's really powerful and great to hear. I did not know that prior to this discussion. In Bangladesh, I kind of covered a little bit briefly in my other answers how social media has been used for the collective good, creates community for a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't be able to find maybe that community in their geographical location settings. So it's able to connect people across spaces as well as family members and friends across spaces during the pandemic and even coming out of it just due to being either across the country from one another or located all over the world. Collectively connecting people across space has been really important, especially with the culture's emphasis on collectivism and the familial unit. And then, kind of going back to that public and mental health, social media has provided the opportunity to kind of actively and easily spread mental health and health resources and information for citizens to utilize.
So, just when Beth say social media is a cheap and effective instrument, I totally agree, because you know in the last 10 years, Vietnamese people they didn't know how to use how to gain access to information, especially public health information. So right now, social media really provide information for Vietnamese people, help them to connect with the rest of the world, help them to catch up with the world, help them to grow with the rest of the world. And I believe that, without social media platform, people, I don't know how people can organize peaceful protests like you and Haley mentioned, or how Vietnamese blogger they report the human rights abuse in Vietnam, because that's the huge issues that people in Vietnam need the world to witness and need some help from the outside world. And I think that's a good way how social media contributes to the growth in Vietnam.
From your readings and your stories, I learned that, like, whereas in some of ours there's different punishments, but the punishment for those bloggers is really serious. That really they're taking their lives into risking their lives to publish this kind of information, and that's sort of unique.
Yeah, and the world needs to see that.
For Singapore, it was more or less the same. WhatsApp is the most popular in the country, so that's really useful to communicate with family. People go shopping using WhatsApp, and COVID was especially powerful when there was social distancing. People couldn't meet, but they could video call and chat. And then, as Wen mentioned, in Singapore, the youth also relies on social media to organize protests, especially virtually, which is really powerful in a country where dissent is cracked down upon and there's very little freedom of assembly as opposed to other Western democracies. And the final good thing I will say that social media has helped with in Singapore is it's really helped to tackle the stigma surrounding mental health. Like in other Asian countries, mental health comes with a big stigma in Singapore, but social media has really changed the conversation in a way that makes those struggling with these issues, it makes them feel like they're not alone, firstly, but secondly, it helps them realize that it's okay to get help and where they can get help. Essentially, it provides a safe space for them to want to better their health mentally, which I think is powerful and much needed in this day and age.
Definitely. You know, we're running a little short on time and coming to the end of our roundtable discussion. So why don't we wrap up and all go around and say, you know, what conclusions or final recommendations we have with regards to these topics for stakeholders in this region.
I could give it a start. I know like so many things were in our mind. It was hard to may have a succinct conversation, but one of the things I mentioned was just more research using data specific to the countries in question. Also, we talked about social media shutdowns, and there's definitely ways to fight that, including like using litigation. Countries that, like Zimbabwe has taken the government to the Supreme Court and won. So that's an idea. Helping the leaders understand why shutdowns are really bad, stressful, and dangerous. And then there's a last thing, the nonprofit Internet Without Borders, which is really interesting, says that we should work with stakeholders, or the country should work with stakeholders in government, business, education, healthcare, and paint a realistic picture of the downsides of shutting down social media and a democracy, and come up with other solutions, including redirecting misinformation.
I completely agree with all of that. And I think it's incredibly applicable to apply to Bangladesh as well. So thank you for that.
Oh, I think that, you know, unlike the Western country, the internet and social media apps, you know, came a little bit late in South Asia, but you know, the region is very potential. So we can advance, take some appropriate or comprehensive approach to advance the development in South Asia, make the region more inclusive. And also, you know, we learn that cell phones are very popular in the region. However, you know, still they are still unaffordable to some group of people. So that is one of the opportunity, you know, we expand the use of smartphone, the internet, you know, to bring more people to the outside world and provide information for them, particularly for women, you know, like how to get them to understand about digital literacy. That is my perspective. And I want to add one more thing, like, yeah, we need to improve the environment, social media environment, especially, you know, to prevent the suicide, you know, anxiety, depression. We want to make social media platform like a playground for everyone to get the good things and prevent the bad consequence as much as possible.
I think for Singapore, there just needs to be more emphasis on collaboration between the government and social media companies. Because right now it seems like very one-sided. But I know part of that can't be changed overnight, especially because of the culture that already exists there. So I think for whatever stakeholders in the region, they should be cognizant of the different culture and the different societal values and how and to be flexible and just emphasize collaboration instead of one specific policy recommendation.
I'm so glad you brought up big tech, Kim, because we didn't really talk a lot about that, but big tech needs to be part of the solution as well. And the big tech companies have to cooperate and work together to support the improvements.
I agree. I think it's definitely a collaborative effort, whether that be, nonprofit organizations, governments, big tech, and even citizens, where maybe their voices are being kind of oppressed and repressed on social media. Continuing with that activism will be super important, as well as gaining international attention to pieces of legislation or governments who are kind of perhaps utilizing social media in a negative way. But I think that pretty much sums up our discussion for today and all of the hard work that we put in. So thank you, everyone. Any final sentiments? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for being a part of our roundtable discussion.